On a centuries-old farm hidden among the Cumbrian mountains in Blackwood Dale, an elderly lady tries to keep tenderness alive amidst the hostile routine of her own home. But behind the colonial windows, her elegant daughter-in-law hides a cruelty that grows day by day, invisible to the eyes of her absent son. When the violence reaches its limit and hope seems to vanish, an unexpected young housekeeper enters the scene and begins to change everything. What this brave woman discovers inside that house could save lives and reveal the extent of a mother's silence for the love of her own son. If this story has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you are watching us from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you will ever hear in your life. The afternoon sun illuminated the well-kept gardens of Brownstone Estate, a century-old property located on the outskirts of Princeton in the mountainous region of New Jersey. The main house, with its soft yellow walls and dark wooden windows, retained the charm of the early American colonial era, with wide verandas and high ceilings. The flowering golden trumpet trees lining the driveway announced spring, while the aroma of freshly brewed coffee escaped through the kitchen windows. Mrs. Dulcie, a 73-year-old woman, carefully watered her orchids on the side veranda. Her white hair was tied in a simple bun, and her hands, marked by time, moved delicately among the flowers. Despite her age and apparent fragility, there was a vivacity in her brown eyes that contrasted with her stooped posture. From time to time, she would raise her gaze to the horizon, as if searching for something beyond the mountains surrounding the property. On the other side of the garden, little Helen, just 6 years old, was playing with a caramel-colored puppy. Her golden curls bounced as she ran, and her clear laughter filled the afternoon air. Mrs. Dulcie smiled at the sight of her granddaughter, her heart warmed by the purity of that childlike joy. "Grandma, look what Toby found," cried Helen, running towards her grandmother with a small blue feather in her hands. "It's beautiful, my dear. It must be from the American robin that nested in the jacaranda tree," Dulcie replied, bending down with difficulty to be at her granddaughter's height. The affectionate scene was interrupted by the arrival of Christine, Helen's mother and Mrs. Dulcie's daughter-in-law. Tall, elegant, with impeccably straightened black hair and designer clothes, Christine seemed out of place in that bucolic setting. Her face of cold and calculated beauty hardened at the sight of the closeness between grandmother and granddaughter. "Helen, I've told you not to run like that. You'll get your whole new dress dirty," Christine said, her voice controlled but sharp. "And you, Mrs. Dulcie, shouldn't encourage her to play with things from the yard. Who knows what kind of diseases those creatures carry?" Mrs. Dulcie straightened up slowly, the smile fading from her lips. "Forgive me, Christine. We were just looking at a little feather she found." "Go inside, Helen. It's time for your bath," Christine ordered. The girl, sensing the tension in the air, lowered her head and obeyed, not without first casting a sad look at her grandmother. When the girl moved away, Christine approached Mrs. Dulcie. Her expensive perfume invaded the space between them like an invisible barrier. "You need to understand your place in this house," she whispered, a false smile on her lips. "You are here out of my husband's charity, nothing more. Don't interfere with my daughter's upbringing." Mrs. Dulcie felt a tightness in her chest but remained silent. For months, she had endured her daughter-in-law's constant jabs. Ever since her son, Richard, insisted she leave her small house in Trenton to live with them at the estate, after a fall that resulted in a fractured hip. The recovery had been difficult and the dependency even more so. "Richard arrives today from New York City," Christine commented, suddenly changing her tone. "Prepare yourself properly for dinner. I don't want him to see his mother looking like just any gardener." Before Mrs. Dulcie could reply, the sound of running water came from the outdoor area of the house. Zelda, the cook who had worked for the family for years, was filling the basin to wash some vegetables. "Go ahead and wash your hair, Mrs. Dulcie," Christine said on a sudden impulse. "It looks like dry straw." Without warning, Christine grabbed her mother-in-law's arm and pulled her towards the water basin. Mrs. Dulcie, surprised, had no time to resist. She felt her daughter-in-law's firm hands on her neck, pushing her head into the cold water. The violence of the gesture caught her off guard. Water entered her nose, her mouth, as she tried in vain to struggle. "It's for your own good, mother-in-law," Christine said, keeping her submerged. "A woman your age should take better care of herself." Zelda, horrified, dropped the vegetables and ran to her employer's aid. "For God's sake, Mrs. Christine, you're going to hurt her." At that exact moment, a car parked at the estate's entrance. Richard Brown, a tall man of athletic build, even at 45, hurried out of the vehicle. He was wearing a well-cut suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Hearing the screams, he ran to the back of the house, encountering the shocking scene. His wife holding his mother's head in the water basin while the cook tried to intervene. "Christine! What is going on here?" Richard shouted, rushing to pull his wife away and help his mother. Mrs. Dulcie emerged from the water, coughing violently, her face red, her white hair plastered to her face, her eyes wide with terror. Richard held her in his arms as she tried to catch her breath. "Calm down, darling," Christine replied, immediately composing an expression of innocence. "Your mother wanted to wash her hair to look nice for dinner. I was just helping. She lost her balance a little, didn't she, Mrs. Dulcie?" The elderly woman, still coughing, could not articulate words. Water ran down her face, mixed with silent tears. Her eyes, however, conveyed a fear Richard had never seen. "Mother, are you all right?" he asked, concerned, helping her to sit on a nearby bench. I am, son," Mrs. Dulcie finally murmured, her voice hoarse. "It was just an accident." Richard looked from his mother to his wife, suspicion growing in his chest. He had known Christine for 15 years, ever since he had fallen madly in love with her in law school. She was stunning, ambitious, and determined. They married soon after graduation, and in a short time he had taken over the family business, a coffee export company he had inherited from his father. With the company's growth, his travels became frequent, leaving Christine responsible for managing the house and the estate. "Zelda, please help my mother change," Richard asked. The cook nodded, casting a worried look at Mrs. Dulcie as she supported her into the house. Alone with his wife, Richard looked at her seriously. "What really happened here, Christine?" "I already told you, darling. Your mother wanted to wash her hair. I tried to help. She lost her balance. You know how elderly people are. They easily lose their balance." Richard remained silent, observing his wife's perfectly made-up face, searching for signs of a lie. "I know you care deeply for your mother," she continued, approaching and adjusting his tie, "and I do too, despite our small differences. After all, you were the one who insisted she come live with us, weren't you? And I accepted, because I love you." Richard took a deep breath, trying to push away the disturbing image he had witnessed. Perhaps he was overreacting. Perhaps it really was an accident. "I'm going to change for dinner," he finally said. "We'll talk more later." As he walked towards the house, Richard couldn't shake the unsettling thought that something wasn't right at the estate he loved so much. The place that had always been his refuge, far from the stress of New York City, now seemed to hold secrets he feared to discover. He looked at the windows on the second floor, where his mother was likely recovering from the accident, and felt a pang of guilt. Perhaps he was neglecting something important while dedicating himself to business. Upon entering the house, he heard Helen's laughter coming from her room. At least his daughter seemed happy and well cared for. That should mean something, shouldn't it? But the image of his mother, soaked and terrified, wouldn't leave his mind. What if that wasn't an isolated incident? What if worse things were happening when he wasn't around? The next morning, Brownstone Estate awoke to its usual routine. The aroma of fresh coffee spread through the corridors, mingling with the smell of homemade bread that Zelda had been preparing since the early hours. In the garden, Mr. Julian, the gardener with calloused hands and an easy smile, pruned the rose bushes with the dedication of someone who knew every plant by name. Mrs. Dulcie was sitting on the veranda, a cup of chamomile tea between her hands. She hadn't slept well. The previous day's episode still reverberated in her body, in the form of a persistent cough and a chest pain that went beyond the physical. She wore a simple patterned cotton dress, and her hair, now dry, was tied in the same discreet bun as always. "Good morning, Mother," Richard's deep voice sounded behind her. "Are you feeling better?" Mrs. Dulcie turned, forcing a smile. "Good morning, son. I'm fine, don't worry." Richard pulled up a chair and sat next to his mother. He was dressed in casual clothes, without the formal suit of the previous day. He observed the aged face he loved so much, noticing the deep, dark circles under her eyes and an almost imperceptible purple mark on her thin neck. "Are you sure, Mother? That accident yesterday worried me." Mrs. Dulcie averted her gaze to the mountains in the distance. How could she tell her son that her life at Brownstone Estate had turned into a nightmare in recent months? How to explain that the incident at the basin was not the first, that Christine tormented her daily with small cruelties, veiled insults, accidental pushes, meals purposely cold or excessively salty? "It was just carelessness, Richard," she finally replied. "Your wife was just trying to help me. You know how stubborn I can be sometimes." Richard sighed, not entirely convinced. "Mother, I know my absence has been difficult. These new contracts with the European market require constant travel, but I promise I will try to be home more now. I don't want to hinder your work, son. You built all this with so much effort. You never hinder me, Mother. It was you and Father who started this legacy. I'm just carrying it on." The mention of her late husband brought a nostalgic sparkle to Mrs. Dulcie's eyes. Anthony Brown had passed away 8 years ago, a victim of a sudden heart attack. Since then, she had lived alone in Trenton until the fall that changed everything. "By the way," Richard continued, "I've hired a new maid to help Zelda. She should arrive this afternoon. I thought it would be good to have someone to assist with household tasks, especially when I'm traveling." Before Mrs. Dulcie could reply, Christine appeared on the veranda, impeccable in her designer workout set, hair tied in a perfect ponytail. Beside her, Helen skipped, wearing a school uniform. "Good morning, family," Christine exclaimed with a radiant smile. She approached Richard and kissed him affectionately on the lips. "Darling, have you had coffee yet? Zelda made that cheese bread you love." "Daddy!" cried Helen, jumping onto her father's lap. "Are you taking me to school today?" "Of course, Princess," Richard replied, hugging his daughter. Christine turned to Mrs. Dulcie, the smile never leaving her lips but not reaching her eyes. "How are you feeling today, Mrs. Dulcie? I hope yesterday's fright has passed." The elderly woman merely nodded, avoiding confrontation. "I'm fine, thank you." "Great," Christine replied in an artificially cheerful tone. "Richard, darling, we need to go. Helen can't be late for school, and you promised to take her, remember?" Richard kissed his mother's forehead before standing up. "We'll talk later, Mother. Rest a bit." As soon as Richard and Helen entered the house to get their things, Christine approached Mrs. Dulcie, leaning in as if to adjust a strand of her mother-in-law's hair. Her strong perfume invaded the space, suffocating. "I hope you learned your lesson yesterday," she whispered, keeping her smile intact. "Next time your dear son might not arrive in time." Mrs. Dulcie felt a shiver run down her spine. Before she could reply, Richard returned with Helen, and Christine moved away, resuming her role as the perfect wife and mother. The morning passed slowly for Mrs. Dulcie. After coffee, she retreated to her room on the second floor, leafing through an old photo album. Images of a happier time. She and Anthony Young, Richard's birth, her son's first steps, parties at the estate when coffee production broke records. How life had changed. Around 3 in the afternoon, the sound of an approaching car caught her attention. From the bedroom window, she saw a small red Fiat parking in front of the main house. A young woman got out of the vehicle, carrying a simple backpack, curly brown hair tied in a messy ponytail, dark skin, modest but clean clothes. She seemed to be just over 20 years old. Mrs. Dulcie watched as Christine went out to greet her. Even from a distance, she could feel her daughter-in-law's haughty posture, the way she looked the newcomer up and down, evaluating her. The young woman, in turn, kept her head held high, politely answering Christine's questions. Minutes later, Zelda gently knocked on Mrs. Dulcie's bedroom door. "Mrs. Dulcie, the new maid has arrived. The madame asked you to come downstairs to meet her." In the living room, with its antique jacaranda wood furniture and Venetian mirrors, Christine was seated in an armchair, like a queen on her throne. The young woman remained standing, hands crossed in front of her body in a respectful posture. "Ah, Mrs. Dulcie, good that you came down," Christine said, as the elderly woman entered the room. "This is Deborah, the new maid Richard hired. Deborah, this is Mrs. Dulcie, my mother-in-law. You will also be in charge of helping her, understood? Bathing, medication, those elderly things." Deborah smiled gently at Mrs. Dulcie. "Pleased to meet you. Padam." "The pleasure is mine, my dear," Mrs. Dulcie replied, feeling an immediate liking for the young woman. "Well, I've already shown you the room where you'll be staying, Deborah," Christine continued. "It's in the service area next to Zelda's room. Meals are served after the family. and your day off will be on Sundays, alternating with Zelda so the house is never without a maid. Any questions? No, madam, it's all clear. Great, you can start by tidying Helen's room. Zelda will show you where the cleaning supplies are. When Deborah and Zelda left the room, Christine turned to Mrs. Dulcie, the cordial smile instantly vanishing. I hope you don't get too friendly with this new maid. She's here to work, not to listen to your old stories. I merely greeted her. Christine, Mrs. Dulcie replied, tired. I know very well how you like to win the sympathy of the staff. Playing the victim, Christine retorted, standing up. But remember, I run this house. Richard may be the owner on paper, but in practice my word is law here. Mrs. Dulcie did not reply. Years of living together had taught her that confronting her daughter-in-law only made things worse. Christine smiled, satisfied with her mother-in-law's submissive silence, and left the room, the sound of her high heels echoing on the wooden floor. That evening, during dinner, the atmosphere in the dining room of Brownstone Estate was one of apparent family harmony. Richard, at one end of the solid wood table, spoke animatedly about his plans to expand coffee exports to Asian countries. Christine, to his right, smiled and made enthusiastic comments at the right moments. Helen, next to her mother, played distractedly with her food. Mrs. Dulcie, seated to her son's left, remained silent, eating small portions of the dinner prepared by Zelda. The new maid, Deborah, moved in and out discreetly, bringing dishes and clearing those already served. Her movements were efficient but warm, without the exaggerated subservience Christine usually demanded. At one point, as she served water to Mrs. Dulcie, their eyes met briefly, and the elderly woman noticed something different about that young woman, a keen intelligence, a perception that went beyond appearances. And how was your first day, Deborah? Richard asked, always cordial with the staff, a trait he had inherited from his father. Before the young woman could reply, Christine intervened. Darling, you don't ask such things during dinner. Deborah is still adapting to the house rules. Sorry, Richard smiled, turning his attention to his daughter. And you, Helen? How was school today? As the girl talked about her science class, Deborah silently retreated to the kitchen. Mrs. Dulcie watched her daughter-in-law, who maintained a perfect smile while her hand under the table squeezed her mother-in-law's wrist hard enough to leave marks. A week had passed since Deborah's arrival at Brownstone Estate. The young woman had quickly adapted to the house's routine, gaining Zelda's trust, who taught her the details of the property's operation, which cleaning products to use on each type of antique furniture, how to deal with Christine's fluctuating temperament, the family's dietary preferences. Richard had left again for New York City, promising to return in 2 weeks. Before leaving, he had spoken at length with Deborah, asking her to take good care of his mother during his absence. My mother isn't as young as she used to be, he had said in his estate office. Sometimes I think she feels a bit out of place here. I know she misses the independence she had in her own home. I understand, sir, Deborah had replied. I will do my best to make her feel comfortable. Thank you. Christine does what she can. But with Helen, the house, and her own projects, she can't always give my mother attention. Deborah had merely nodded, keeping to herself what she had already begun to observe in that family's dynamic. On Sunday morning, her first day off, Deborah decided to walk to the small village near the estate. The day was clear, with that golden light typical of mornings in the New Jersey Highlands. Dressed in jeans, a t-shirt and sneakers, she walked down the dirt road connecting the property to the village, enjoying the silence and the scenery. Deborah's life had not been easy. Orphaned since she was 12, she had grown up in an orphanage in Newburgh. She had studied with determination, securing a scholarship for a pedagogy degree, which she had recently completed. The job at Brownstone Estate was temporary, a means to save money while awaiting the results of a civil service exam for a public school teacher position. In the village, with its colourful houses and a small colonial church in the centre of the square, Deborah had coffee at the local bakery, leafing through a book of Brazilian literature she had brought with her. At a nearby table, 2 ladies conversed in low voices, but not so low that Deborah couldn't hear. Did you see how down Mrs. Dulcie looked at Mass last week? One of them commented. I remember when she and the late Mr. Anthony always came on Sundays, bringing little Richard. She was so cheerful, so full of life. Indeed, the other replied, stirring her coffee. They say the daughter-in-law is not to be trifled with. Very beautiful, very elegant, but she has a look that doesn't fool me. I've worked in wealthy homes. I know how to recognize when someone isn't a good person. The worst part is that Richard is always traveling, poor man. A good man, but very busy with that company. He probably doesn't even know what happens when he's not around. And what happens? The first one asked, leaning closer. Well, my niece worked there for a month before being fired without cause. She told me she saw that Christine humiliating Mrs. Dulcie, hiding medications, serving cold food on purpose. Small things, you know. Those that don't leave a mark, but slowly wear a person down from the inside. Deborah feigned concentration on her book, but every word reverberated in her mind, confirming the suspicions she had begun to harbor. Upon returning to the estate in the late afternoon, she found Helen playing alone in the garden, under the watchful eye of Zelda, who was hanging clothes on the line. Christine had gone out for lunch with friends in Princeton and had not yet returned. "Deborah," the girl exclaimed upon seeing her. "Look what I drew for Grandma." Helen held out a colorful paper on which was a drawing of two figures holding hands, one small, the other taller, with white hair. "It's beautiful, Helen," Deborah smiled. "Your grandmother will love it." "Where is she?" "In her room," Zelda replied, approaching. "She's not feeling very well today. She complained of chest pains." Concerned, Deborah went upstairs to Mrs. Dulcie's room. She gently knocked on the door. "Come in," a weak voice replied. The room was in semi-darkness, with the curtains half closed. Mrs. Dulcie was lying down, a shawl over her shoulders despite the warm day. She seemed smaller and more fragile than ever. "Hello, Mrs. Dulcie, it's me, Deborah. I came to see if you need anything." The elderly woman smiled faintly. "How kind of you, my dear. I'm just a little tired today." Deborah approached the bed, noticing a dark bruise on the elderly woman's arm, partially covered by her dress sleeve. Gently she touched the spot. "Mrs. Dulcie, what happened to your arm?" The lady quickly pulled down her sleeve, covering the bruise. "Nothing, my dear. You know how it is, old people bruise easily. I bumped into the doorframe last night." Deborah didn't insist, but her eyes registered other signs, the way Mrs. Dulcie flinched slightly when she heard footsteps in the corridor, the tremor in her hands when Christine was mentioned, the deep dark circles under her eyes indicating sleepless nights. "I brought a book with me today," Deborah said, changing the subject. "Would you like me to read a bit to you?" Mrs. Dulcie's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "I'd love that. It's been so long since I had someone to talk about literature with." For the next hour, Deborah read short stories by Clarice Lispector to the elderly woman, who listened attentively, occasionally making insightful comments about the text. That moment of connection revealed to Deborah that, behind the physical fragility, there was a mind still alive and active. "You really enjoy reading, don't you?" Deborah asked, closing the book. "Oh, yes. I was always a teacher, you know. I taught literature for almost 40 years at Trenton State High School. That's where I met Anthony, my husband. He was a history teacher. That's wonderful. I recently graduated with a degree in pedagogy." Mrs. Dulcie's eyes lit up. "Really, what a charming coincidence. So you understand the transformative power of education." They chatted animatedly about books, teaching methods, and classroom experiences, until the sound of a car parking interrupted the moment. "Christine has arrived," Mrs. Dulcie murmured, her face instantly losing the brightness it had displayed minutes before. Deborah noticed the immediate change in the elderly woman's behavior. "Don't worry, Mrs. Dulcie. I'll go down and say you're resting." "Thank you, my dear," Mrs. Dulcie replied, holding the young woman's hand. "Your company today was a balm for this old teacher." As she descended the stairs, Deborah found Christine in the entrance hall, placing shopping bags on a side table. She wore an elegant white pantsuit and blazer, discreet but visibly expensive jewelry, impeccable makeup despite being out all day. "Deborah? I thought it was your day off," Christine commented, surprised. "Yes, madam. I'm already back. I was just checking if Mrs. Dulcie needed anything before going to my room." Christine's face subtly hardened. "You don't need to worry about my mother-in-law. I take care of her myself." "Of course, madam. I just thought I'd help because Zelda mentioned she wasn't feeling well." "Mrs. Dulcie always has some complaint," Christine replied, with a forced smile. "An old trick to get attention. Richard fell into that trap by insisting she come live with us. Now we have to put up with her daily dramas." Deborah maintained a neutral expression, but felt indignation growing within her. "I understand. Excuse me, I'm going to help Zelda with dinner." In the kitchen, she found the cook preparing a vegetable soup. Zelda, a 60-year-old black woman, had worked for the Brown family since Mr. Anthony's time. She knew all the secrets of that house, but generally kept silent, fearing to lose the job that provided for her son and grandchildren. "Zelda," Deborah whispered, making sure they were alone. "How long has Mrs. Dulcie been mistreated by her daughter-in-law?" The cook stopped stirring the soup, looking nervously at the door. "What are you talking about, child? I saw the bruises. I noticed how she changes when Christine is around. I heard comments in the village." Zelda sighed deeply, seeming to age 10 years in that instant. "It started when Mrs. Dulcie came to live here after her fall. In the beginning, it was just rude words, glances, small humiliations. Then, well, it got worse. And no one does anything. Mr. Richard is almost never here. When he comes, Christine transforms into the perfect daughter-in-law. And when he notices something strange, she always has a convincing explanation. Why doesn't Mrs. Dulcie tell her son the truth? Do I fear shame? I don't know. Perhaps she doesn't want to cause problems in her son's marriage. Perhaps she fears they won't believe her. Or worse, that they will believe her but send her back to Trenton, separating her from the granddaughter she loves so much." Deborah remained silent, processing the information. A decision began to form in her mind. "We need to help her, Zelda." "How, child? We're just maids. No one will believe our word against Christine Browns, the wife of one of the most respected businessmen in the region." "There has to be a way," Deborah insisted. "We cannot be accomplices through silence." That night, lying in her small room in the service area, Deborah reflected on her situation. The job at Brownstone Estate was temporary, but important for her future plans. If she confronted Christine or tried to expose the situation, she would certainly be fired. On the other hand, how could she ignore the suffering of a defenseless elderly woman? Mrs. Dulcie's face, with her sweet smile and sad eyes, wouldn't leave her mind. She thought of her own grandmother, who had raised her until she was 12 with so much love before passing away. She couldn't simply turn her back. Days at Brownstone Estate followed their seemingly tranquil course, like the waters of a river hiding dangerous currents beneath its calm surface. The yellow-golden trumpet trees lining the property's entrance were in full bloom, creating a golden contrast against the intense green of the mountains in the background. Tourists passing by the road often stopped to photograph the beautiful landscape, without imagining the dramas unfolding behind the windows of that century-old house. Deborah had completed 2 weeks of work at the estate. Each day brought new discoveries about that family's dynamic, revelations that confirmed her initial suspicions. The young woman had established her own routine. She woke before dawn to have a moment of reading, helped Zelda prepare breakfast, took care of the house cleaning during the morning, and, whenever possible, spent time with Mrs. Dulcie in the afternoon, when Christine usually went out for social engagements in Princeton. On a particularly sunny Tuesday, while organizing the linen closet in the second-floor corridor, Deborah heard raised voices coming from Mrs. Dulcie's room. The door was ajar, allowing fragments of the discussion to reach her. "I've already told you I don't want these junk medicines." It was Christine's voice, sharp as a blade. "Do you think we have money to waste on your hypochondria?" "But the doctor prescribed them, Christine," Mrs. Dulcie replied, her voice trembling. "It's for my blood pressure. Richard left money for me to manage as I see fit," Christine interrupted, "and I'm not going to spend it on unnecessary medicines. If you want to die, just die already. But don't keep causing trouble and spending our money." Deborah froze in place, her heart racing. Without making a sound, she moved closer to the door, driven by concern. "Please, Christine," Mrs. Dulcie pleaded. "They are just the medicines I've always taken. I don't care. I run this house. And keep this bottle I'm leaving you safe because it's the last one. When it's empty, you're on your own." Deborah heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly returned to the closet, pretending to organize the towels. Christine left the room, slamming the door shut. Seeing the maid in the corridor, she stopped, narrowing her eyes. "How long have you been there?" "I just came up, madam," Deborah lied, keeping her gaze down. "I'm tidying the linen closet as you requested." Christine watched her for a few seconds, suspiciously. "Finish that quickly. Then I want you to wash my car." I'm going to a charity event in Princeton tonight, and it needs to be immaculate. Yes, madam. As soon as Christine went downstairs, Deborah gently knocked on Mrs. Dulcie's door. There was no answer. Concerned, she opened the door slightly, finding the elderly woman sitting in the armchair by the window, her face pale, her trembling hands holding an almost empty pill bottle. Mrs. Dulcie, Deborah called, approaching cautiously. You all right? The elderly woman looked up, and Deborah saw that her eyes were teary. Oh, Deborah, I didn't know you were there. I heard voices. I got worried. Mrs. Dulcie tried to smile, but the result was an expression of deep sadness. It's nothing, dear. Just a small disagreement. Deborah knelt beside the armchair, observing the medicine bottle. Are those your blood pressure medications? Yes, but they're running out, and Christine, well, she thinks they're not necessary. But that's dangerous. You can't go without your medicine. I'm old already, my child. Perhaps it's better to leave soon and stop being a burden to everyone. Those words hit Deborah like a slap. To see a woman who had been a teacher, who had educated generations, reduced to such a state of helplessness and hopelessness was unbearable. Don't say that. Please, Deborah pleaded, holding the elderly woman's hands. You are not a burden. You are a valuable person who deserves respect and care. Mrs. Dulcie smiled sadly. You have a good heart, Deborah. You remind me of my old student, Marianne. She also had that fire, that indignation at injustices. A sudden idea occurred to Deborah. Mrs. Dulcie, do you have any friends or relatives you trust? Someone you could call and tell what's happening? The elderly woman reflected for a moment. Well, I have my younger sister, Cecily. She lives in Baltimore, but I don't want to worry her. She has her own health problems. What about a former colleague? Someone from the time you were a teacher? Yes. There's Oliver, the old principal of the school where I taught. We were good friends. He must be retired now. Do you have his number? Or any way to contact him? I think so. In my agenda, in the dresser drawer. Deborah found the old leather agenda with pages yellowed by time. Among the contacts, the name Edward Oliver appeared with a phone number. She stored the information mentally, planning to make the call when she had the opportunity. I'll get your medicine, Mrs. Dulcie, Deborah promised. How, my dear? Christine controls all the money in the house. Leave it to me. I have some savings. It's not much, but it's enough to buy the medications until Mr. Richard returns. Mrs. Dulcie's eyes filled with tears. I can't accept, Deborah. You work so hard for every penny. I can and I want to help. It's the right thing to do. That same afternoon, taking advantage of being sent to the village to buy groceries, Deborah stopped by the small local pharmacy. With the hidden prescription Mrs. Dulcie had given her, she purchased the necessary medications, spending a good part of her savings. Back at the estate, she hid the medicines in an empty biscuit tin, which she placed in Mrs. Dulcie's room, behind some books on the shelf. She instructed the elderly woman to take the medications away from Christine's sight and to keep the original, almost empty bottle in a visible place so as not to arouse suspicion. The plan worked for a few days, with Mrs. Dulcie regaining some of her color and vitality. Deborah, meanwhile, carefully observed Christine's routine, noticing her patterns, her fragilities, her moments of vulnerability. The maid knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but something within her, perhaps the same sense of justice that had led her to choose a career as an educator, prevented her from standing still. On Friday of that week, Deborah had a surprise when she answered the estate phone and heard Richard Brown's voice. Hello, Deborah? This is Richard. Is everything all right there? Yes, sir. All in order, she replied, choosing her words carefully. Great, I'm calling to let you know I'll be back tomorrow, a little earlier than expected. I managed to resolve some business sooner than anticipated, and I'm homesick. That's good, sir. We all miss you, Deborah said, a relief washing over her. Richard's return could mean a respite for Mrs. Dulcie. How is my mother? Deborah hesitated for a second. She is recovering from a slight indisposition, but she's already better. Indisposition? Christine didn't tell me anything. She probably didn't want to worry you, sir. Nothing serious, just a drop in blood pressure. I see. Well, I'll be there tomorrow and can see for myself. Please don't mention my arrival to anyone. I want to surprise Helen and my wife. Of course, sir. It will be a secret. After hanging up, Deborah felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. Richard's arrival could be the perfect opportunity to expose the situation. But how to do so without risking her job or worse, without Christine becoming suspicious and retaliating against Mrs. Dulcie before the truth came out? In the late afternoon, while helping Helen with her homework in the living room, Deborah heard the sound of glass breaking, followed by shouts coming from the kitchen. Asking the girl to continue her work, she ran to see what was happening. In the kitchen, she found Zelda standing paralyzed with fear, while Christine screamed, pointing to a broken crystal pitcher on the floor. "Incompetent! Do you know how much that piece costs? It was an heirloom from Richard's family." "I'm sorry, madam," Zelda murmured, trembling. "It was an accident. It slipped from my hand while I was washing it." "Accident? An accident is what happens once. You're always breaking things, you clumsy woman." Deborah noticed Mrs. Dulcie was in a corner of the kitchen, watching the scene with wide eyes full of fear. When Christine raised her hand as if to slap Zelda, the elderly woman stepped forward. "It wasn't her fault, Christine," Mrs. Dulcie said, her voice trembling but resolute. "It was I who bumped into her arm while she was washing the pitcher." Christine slowly turned to her mother-in-law, her eyes flashing with anger. "What, so it was you? Why am I not surprised? Always causing problems, always in the way." Deborah quickly intervened. "Madam, may I clean this up? There are glass shards everywhere. Someone might get cut." "Shut up and don't interfere," Christine exploded. "I'm tired of you three conspiring against me in this house. Let's see how you manage without jobs." At that moment, the telephone rang, cutting the tension like a knife. Christine took a deep breath, composing herself instantly. "I'll get it," she said, leaving the kitchen with firm steps. The second Christine left the room, Zelda collapsed into a chair, her legs weak. Mrs. Dulcie approached, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Deborah began to gather the glass shards scattered across the floor. "You shouldn't have taken the blame, Mrs. Dulcie," Zelda whispered. "Now she'll be even angrier with you." "I couldn't let her attack you, my friend," the elderly woman replied. "You've always been so good to my family." Saturday dawned with a fine drizzle covering the mountains of the New Jersey Highlands. A dense fog enveloped Brownstone Estate, giving it an even more isolated and melancholic air. In Deborah's room, the alarm clock rang at 5:30 in the morning as usual. The young woman got up, rubbing her eyes still heavy with sleep. She hadn't slept well, thinking about Richard's arrival and the possibilities it brought. After a quick shower, Deborah went to the kitchen to help Zelda with breakfast. The cook was already there, preparing the cheese bread dough. "Good morning, Zelda," Deborah greeted, lowering her voice. "Mr. Richard arrives today. He called me yesterday." Zelda's eyes widened. "Thank God. Maybe things will get a little better around here." "He asked for secrecy. He wants to make a surprise." "I see. I'll prepare that steak with wine sauce that he likes. Should I tell Mrs. Dulcie?" Deborah thought for a moment. "Better not. Mrs. Christine might notice something in her behavior. The fewer people who know, the more convincing the surprise will be." The two worked in silence for some time, preparing the family's breakfast. At 7 o'clock, Christine came down, elegant in her workout set as if the previous night's incident had never happened. "Good morning," she said coolly. "Is coffee ready?" "Yes, madam," Zelda replied, serving a cup of fresh coffee. "Great, Helen and I are leaving right after coffee. I have a Pilates class in Princeton, and then I'll take Helen to a schoolmate's birthday party. We won't be back until tonight." "Should I prepare lunch for you and the girl?" Zelda asked. "It won't be necessary. We'll have lunch in town. Just leave something ready for Mrs. Dulcie. Something simple. She doesn't need luxuries." Deborah and Zelda exchanged quick glances. Christine and Helen's absence all day would be perfect for Richard's arrival. After coffee, Christine and her daughter left in the family's elegant black SUV. When the car disappeared down the dirt road leading to the property, Deborah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was as if the house itself breathed more freely in the mistress's absence. Mrs. Dulcie appeared in the kitchen around 9 o'clock, wearing a simple floral cotton dress. She seemed more cheerful that morning, perhaps due to Christine's absence, perhaps due to the medicines she had resumed taking regularly thanks to Deborah's intervention. "Good morning, dears," the elderly woman smiled. "What a pleasant silence in the house today." "Mrs. Christine and little Helen went out for the whole day," Zelda explained, serving a cup of tea to her employer. "They won't be back until tonight." "Oh, how wonderful," Mrs. Dulcie sighed with visible relief. We can have a peaceful day then. Would you mind accompanying me to the garden after coffee? Deborah asked. The orchids you care for have some yellowed leaves. I thought you could teach me how to treat them. Mrs. Dulcie's face lit up. I'd love to, my dear. It's always a pleasure to share knowledge with someone interested in learning. After coffee, the two went out, into the garden. The day had brightened, the drizzle giving way to a timid sun that struggled to break through the clouds. Mrs. Dulcie, like a dedicated teacher, explained to Deborah the necessary care for each type of orchid, the ideal amount of water, their position relative to the sun, the signs of diseases and pests. Oh, you know, Deborah, orchids are like people, the elderly woman commented, as she delicately removed a yellowed leaf. Each one has its personality, its specific needs. Some need more attention, others prefer to be left alone. But all, without exception, need respect and care. Deborah nodded, understanding the metaphor, and they all deserve to bloom in their own time, don't they? Exactly, my dear. Exactly. Around noon, while Zelda prepared a simple but nutritious lunch for Mrs. Dulcie, Deborah was cleaning the living room. Suddenly she heard the sound of a car approaching. Through the window pane she recognized Richard's executive sedan. Her heart quickened. "Zelda!" she called, running to the kitchen. "Mr. Richard has arrived." The cook dropped the spoon she was using to stir a soup, her eyes wide. "Already? I thought he'd arrive later." "I'll greet him. Continue what you were doing." Deborah stepped out onto the veranda just as Richard parked the car. He looked tired, but smiled when he saw the maid. "Good afternoon, Deborah. How are things here?" "Good afternoon, sir. All in order. Your mother is in the garden tending to the orchids." Richard seemed relieved. "That's good. I've been worried about her since our phone conversation. You said she had an indisposition?" "Yes, sir. A drop in blood pressure, but she's already better. And where are Christine and Helen?" "They went out for the whole day. The girl had a birthday party and the madam went to a Pilates class." Richard nodded, entering the house. The familiar aroma of coffee and cheese bread greeted him, bringing him comfort after days in impersonal hotels. "I'm going to see my mother," he said, heading to the garden. Deborah watched through the window the meeting between mother and son. Mrs. Dulcie, seeing Richard approaching among the rose bushes, broke into a genuine smile, the first Deborah had seen on her face since she started working there. The businessman hugged his mother affectionately, kissing the top of her head. During lunch, served on the veranda overlooking the mountains, Richard chatted animatedly with Mrs. Dulcie about his travels, the new contracts, his plans for the company. The elderly woman listened attentively, asking insightful questions that demonstrated her genuine interest in her son's career. Deborah, serving dessert, a milk pudding made by Zelda, noticed how Mrs. Dulcie seemed like a different person in her son's presence. There was color in her cheeks, sparkle in her eyes, firmness in her voice. The young maid felt a pang of sadness, knowing that transformation was temporary, lasting only as long as Richard was present. After lunch, while Mrs. Dulcie went to rest, a bit in her room, Richard called Deborah to his office. It was an elegant room, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a solid wood desk, and a wide window offering views of the gardens. "So, Deborah," he began, indicating a chair for her to sit on. "How has my mother really been? Please be honest." The young woman hesitated. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the opportunity to reveal everything. But the words seemed stuck in her throat. What if Richard didn't believe her? What if Christine managed to manipulate him again? "Sir, your mother," she began, choosing her words carefully. "I've noticed she seems very different when you're not here." "Different how?" "More withdrawn, anxious, as if she's always afraid of something or someone." Richard frowned, leaning forward in his chair. "Afraid? My mother was never a fearful person. I know, sir, she was a teacher for decades, a strong and independent woman, as she herself told me." "Exactly," Richard agreed, surprised that the maid knew so much about his mother's past. "So, what do you think is happening?" Deborah took a deep breath. It was now or never. "Sir, I've observed interactions between your mother and your wife that concern me." Richard's face hardened. What kind of interactions? Harsh words, small but constant humiliations. And? She hesitated again. I noticed bruises on Mrs. Dulcie's arms. When I asked about them, she said she bumped into furniture, that she hurt herself, but it happens very frequently. Richard stood up abruptly, walking to the window. He remained silent for long seconds, observing the garden where, days before, he had witnessed the accident at the water basin. Are you suggesting that my wife physically abuses my mother? He finally asked, his voice strangely calm. I'm not just suggesting it, sir. I'm stating what I saw with my own eyes. Deborah then told him about the hidden medicines, the insults when he wasn't present, the daily small cruelties. She narrated how Christine controlled every aspect of Mrs. Dulcie's life, from what she ate to when she could see her granddaughter. Richard listened in silence, his face an impenetrable mask. When Deborah finished, he sat back down, rubbing his face with his hands. Why did my mother never tell me anything? Perhaps out of shame, sir, or fear of causing problems in your marriage, or apprehension that you wouldn't believe her. I would believe her. She's my mother. With all due respect, sir, your wife is very convincing, and you spend little time at home. The words hit Richard like a punch. It was true, he had been so involved with the company's expansion, with international travel, meetings, contracts, that he had neglected what was happening in his own home. He had blindly trusted Christine, enchanted by her beauty and intelligence, ignoring the small signs that now, in retrospect, seemed so obvious. What should I do? He murmured, more to himself than to Deborah. Observe, sir. Pay attention. The truth always finds a way to come out. At that moment, Richard's cell phone rang. It was Christine informing him that she and Helen would be returning earlier as the birthday party had ended sooner than expected. They'll be here in an hour, Richard informed Deborah after hanging up. Please don't mention anything about our conversation. I want to observe with my own eyes. Yes, sir. When Deborah left the office, she found Mrs. Dulcie in the corridor, holding a book in her hands. There was an expression of concern on her face. Is everything all right, Deborah? I saw you going into Richard's office. Yes, Mrs. Dulcie, Mr. Richard just wanted to know how you've been. The elderly woman seemed alarmed. What did you tell him? Just the truth, that you are an admirable person who teaches me a lot about plants and literature. Mrs. Dulcie visibly relaxed. Oh, I see. Thank you, my dear. Sometimes I worry for nothing. The rest of the afternoon passed peacefully, with Richard working in his office and Mrs. Dulcie reading on the veranda. Around 4 o'clock, the sound of Christine's car announced her return. Helen jumped out of the vehicle even before it had fully stopped, running towards the house. Daddy, Daddy, you're back! The girl cried as she spotted Richard coming out of the office. He picked her up, spinning her in the air, while she laughed joyfully. Christine got out of the car more slowly, her face registering surprise, and then composing itself into a radiant smile. She wore an elegant dress that accentuated her slender figure, and her hair was impeccably styled, as if she had just left a beauty salon. Richard, what a wonderful surprise, she exclaimed, approaching to kiss him. Why didn't you tell me you were coming back today? I wanted to make it a surprise, he replied, embracing her with one arm, while still holding Helen with the other. His eyes, however, watched Christine with new attention, searching for signs of what Deborah had revealed. Well, I'm delighted, Christine smiled. We missed you so much, didn't we, Helen? Yes, the girl agreed enthusiastically. Daddy, are you going to stay for a long time now? A few days, Princess. I have matters to resolve right here. Night fell over Brownstone Estate, bringing with it the characteristic coolness of the Highlands. The yellowish lights of the antique lamps illuminated the dining room, where the family gathered for their first meal together in weeks. Christine, impeccable in a navy blue dress, had personally supervised the dinner preparation, ordering Zelda to make Richard's favorite dishes. Helen chatted happily about her friend's birthday party, while Mrs. Dulcie remained silent, eating small portions and discreetly observing the interaction between her son and daughter-in-law. Richard, in turn, maintained a cordial smile, but his watchful eyes didn't miss a single movement from Christine. He observed the way she poured more wine for herself than for his mother, how she interrupted Mrs. Dulcie every time the latter tried to join the conversation, The warning glances she shot her mother-in-law when she thought no one was watching. "Deborah," Christine called as the maid entered to clear the dessert plates. "Prepare a chamomile tea for Mrs. Dulcie. It's getting late for her." "It's only 8 o'clock, Christine," Richard observed, checking his watch. "Mother was always a night owl. I remember when I was a child she would stay up late grading students' papers." "Things change, darling," Christine replied with a condescending smile. "Your mother needs more rest now. Don't you agree, Mrs. Dulcie?" The elderly woman nodded automatically, her gaze lowered. "Yes, I'm a little tired." "See," Christine continued, "elderly people need routine, early to bed, preferably after a calming tea. I read about it in a geriatrics magazine." Richard frowned slightly, noticing the infantilizing way Christine referred to his mother, as if she weren't present or were incapable of making decisions about her own life. "I think Mother knows better than anyone what she needs," he commented, keeping his tone light but firm. "And if she wants to stay up a little longer tonight, to talk with me after so long away, I see no problem." A flash of irritation crossed Christine's face, quickly replaced by a forced smile. "Of course, darling. I'm just thinking of her well-being." Mrs. Dulcie looked at her son with a silent gratitude that broke Richard's heart. It was a look that said a lot, the look of someone who wasn't used to being defended. After dinner, Helen was put to bed, despite her protests that she wanted to stay longer with her father. Christine insisted on the routine, kissing her daughter and closing the nursery door with a soft click. In the living room, Richard proposed a card game, something they used to do as a family when he was a child. Mrs. Dulcie accepted with a nostalgic smile, while Christine reluctantly agreed, claiming she was tired. "You're never too tired for your Pilates classes or lunches with friends," Richard commented casually, shuffling the cards. Christine shot him a surprised look. "What do you mean by that?" "Nothing, darling. Just an observation." The game proceeded in an atmosphere of palpable tension. Christine, visibly bothered by Mrs. Dulcie's prolonged presence, made acidic comments whenever her mother-in-law hesitated in her move. "It seems your memory isn't what it used to be, is it, Mrs. Dulcie?" she commented with faint concern when the elderly woman took a long time to make her choice. "My mother was always an excellent strategist," Richard defended. "She's just planning how to beat us, isn't she, Mother?" Mrs. Dulcie smiled, a flicker of her old spirit reappearing in her eyes. "Exactly, son." To Christine's chagrin, Mrs. Dulcie won 2 consecutive rounds, demonstrating that her mind was as sharp as ever. Around 10 o'clock, when Christine suggested for the 3rd time that it was getting late, Richard finally agreed to end the game. "I'll accompany Mother to her room," he offered, standing up. "No need, darling," Christine quickly replied. "I'll help your mother." "You must be tired from your trip." "I'm fine," Richard insisted. "I want to talk a little more with her privately." In the corridor leading to Mrs. Dulcie's room, out of Christine's earshot, Richard finally asked the question that had tormented him since his conversation with Deborah. "Mother, is everything all right between you and Christine when I'm not here?" Mrs. Dulcie stopped walking, her fragile body tensing. In her tired eyes, Richard saw fear, hesitation, and a deep sadness. "Why do you ask that, my son?" "Because I've noticed strange things. The way you flinch when she approaches, how you avoid looking directly at her. The way your voice changes becomes softer, more submissive." Mrs. Dulcie remained silent for long seconds as if fighting an internal battle. Finally, she sighed deeply. "Your father and I always taught you that the truth, however painful, is always the best path," she said, her voice gaining an unexpected firmness. "Richard, I didn't want to interfere in your marriage, in your family. I know how much you love Helen and how much you strive to give her a stable life. Mother, please, tell me the truth." "The truth is that Christine is not the person you think she is. When you're not here, she transforms. Kind words give way to insults, threats. She hides my medicine, serves me cold or excessively seasoned food, prevents me from seeing Helen alone." Mrs. Dulcie's voice choked up, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "And sometimes there's more than words. A push here, a pinch there. That incident at the basin, it wasn't the first time." Richard felt as if the ground disappeared beneath his feet. His mother's words confirmed everything Deborah had said and his own growing suspicions. Anger bubbled in his chest, mixed with overwhelming guilt. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, embracing her gently. I was afraid, son. Afraid you wouldn't believe me. Or worse, that you would believe me but choose to stay with her anyway. I couldn't bear the thought of separating you from your daughter, or of returning to my house in Trenton, away from both of you. I would never let you go back there alone, Mother, and I would never choose someone who hurts the people I love. At that moment, a noise coming from the end of the corridor caught both their attention. It was Helen in her unicorn pajamas, her eyes sleepy. Daddy? Grandma, why are you crying? Richard quickly wiped away the tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. It's nothing, Princess. We were just reminiscing about some stories from the past. Grandma was telling me about when I was little like you. Can I listen too? The girl asked, approaching. Tomorrow, my love, Mrs. Dulcie promised, bending down to kiss her granddaughter's forehead. Now it's time to go back to bed. Dream of angels. Richard took Helen back to her room, telling her a brief story to help her fall asleep. When he returned, he found his mother sitting on the edge of the bed, her gaze lost in the distance. What do you intend to do, Richard? She asked, her voice a whisper. What I should have done a long time ago. Confront the truth. The next morning, Sunday dawned radiantly, with an intense, cloudless blue sky. The aroma of coffee and fresh bread filled the kitchen of Brownstone Estate, where Zelda had been working since early morning. Deborah helped preparing a tray with breakfast for Mrs. Dulcie, who was still resting. How was the night? The cook asked in a low voice. I noticed a strange tension at dinner. I'm not sure, Deborah replied, but I think Mr. Richard is starting to realize what's happening here. God willing, this situation cannot continue. Richard appeared in the kitchen, already dressed in casual but elegant clothes. There were dark circles under his eyes, indicating a sleepless night. Good morning, he greeted. Deborah, could you meet me in the office after serving my mother's breakfast? I have something important to discuss. Of course, sir. 20 minutes later, Deborah knocked on the office door. Richard was sitting behind his desk, consulting some documents. Come in, Deborah, he called. And close the door, please. The young woman obeyed, her heart racing. Had he believed her words? Or was he about to fire her for meddling in family affairs? I spoke with my mother last night, Richard began, indicating a chair for her to sit on. She confirmed everything you told me. Deborah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. What do you intend to do, sir? First, I want to thank you for your courage and integrity. It must not have been easy to tell me that, risking your job. I couldn't stay silent, sir. It wouldn't be right. Richard nodded, genuine respect in his gaze. People like you are rare, Deborah. As for what I intend to do, I'm going to confront Christine today. But first, I need to ensure that my mother and Helen will be safe regardless of the outcome of that conversation. I understand, sir. Therefore, I would like to ask for your help. Zelda will take my mother and Helen for an outing in town, for Grandma and Granddaughter Day, as she suggested at breakfast. Meanwhile, you will stay here, but discreetly, as if you were just doing your normal tasks. Deborah understood immediately. Richard wanted a witness for the confrontation with Christine, someone who could intervene if the situation got out of hand. I will be nearby, sir. At 10 o'clock, Zelda departed with Mrs. Dulcie and Helen, taking the estate's old pickup truck. Christine, who intended to spend Sunday sunbathing by the pool, raised no objections to the outing, even seeming relieved to have her mother-in-law away for a few hours. Richard found his wife by the pool, wearing a tiny bikini and sunglasses, her tanned body stretched out on a lounge chair. A glass of white wine rested on the side table despite the early hour. Can we talk, Christine? He asked, sitting on the lounge chair next to her. Of course, love, she replied, taking off her sunglasses and smiling seductively. I've missed you. We've hardly had any time alone since you returned. Richard ignored the insinuation. I want to talk about my mother. Christine's smile faltered for a second. What about her? I know what you've been doing, Christine. The abuses, the humiliations, the physical violence. The woman's face transformed, the mask of perfection falling to reveal an expression of contained fury. What are you talking about? Who's been spreading lies about me? No one needed to invent anything. I saw it with my own eyes yesterday, and my mother confirmed everything. Christine stood up abruptly, knocking over the wine glass. The golden liquid spread across the wooden deck like a puddle of accusation. That manipulative old woman. She always wanted to separate us. always jealous of our relationship. Don't you see she's making all this up? And the bruises, and the incident at the basin that I witnessed, and the hidden medicines. Accidents! She's clumsy, always bumping into furniture. And as for the medicines, I'm just controlling expenses. Do you know how much it costs to keep this estate running while you travel the world? Richard also stood up, facing his wife with a coldness he had never shown before. Enough with the lies, Christine. I know everything. The maids saw it. The neighbors commented. And now I saw it too. Christine's eyes, once seductive, now blazed with hatred. It was as if a mask had fallen, revealing the true face hidden behind the facade of a perfect wife and daughter-in-law. She took a step towards Richard, her fists clenched. You have no idea what it's like to be stuck on this estate in the middle of nowhere, while your husband travels to exotic places, meets interesting people, she spat, her voice trembling with rage. All I have is an unbearable old woman following me around the house, with her outdated advice and her tedious stories about a time that no longer matters. If you were so unhappy, why didn't you talk to me? Richard asked, maintaining his calm despite the storm unfolding before him. Why take out your frustrations on a defenseless elderly woman? Talk? Christine laughed bitterly. When? In the 5 minutes between one trip and another? In the hurried phone calls where you only talk about business? You abandoned us here, Richard. You abandoned me and Helen. That doesn't justify what you did to my mother. Your mother, that's all that matters to you, Christine exploded. Ever since she came to live here, it's as if I no longer exist. All your love, all your concern, all for the frail old woman who isn't even your responsibility. Richard felt a shiver run down his spine upon hearing those words. How could he not have noticed before the toxic nature of the woman he had married? How could he have allowed that poison to spread through his family? She is my mother, Christine, the woman who raised me, who taught me values, who sacrificed her own career to give me opportunities. And I brought her here believing she would be safe, cared for, loved. What about me? What about our marriage? Don't they matter? A marriage based on lies and cruelty? No, it no longer matters. Christine's eyes widened as she realized the meaning of those words. What are you saying? I'm saying it's over, Christine. I can no longer trust you, not after what you've done. I want a divorce. For an instant she seemed genuinely shocked, as if she hadn't expected him to go that far. Then her face took on a calculating expression. Think carefully, Richard. I am your daughter's mother. If you push me away, you'll never see Helen again. I'll fight for full custody, and with my contacts, believe me, I'll get it. Don't threaten me, Christine. I have evidence of your abuses, witnesses. No judge would grant custody of a child to someone capable of mistreating a defenseless elderly woman. The mention of witnesses made Christine look around suspiciously. That's when she noticed Deborah standing by the pool area door, observing the scene. Fury took over her face. You! She screamed, pointing at the maid. It was you who put these ideas in his head. You wretch! You're fired! I decide who works in this house, Richard intervened firmly, and Deborah will not only remain employed, but will also receive a raise for her integrity. Christine, realizing she had lost control of the situation, suddenly changed tactics. Tears began to stream down her perfectly made-up face, and her arrogant posture gave way to a studied fragility. Richard, darling, you're not thinking straight, she sobbed, approaching and trying to touch his face. I'm stressed, tired. I made mistakes, I admit it. But we can start over, go to couples therapy, find a middle ground. Richard pulled away, immune to the theatrics that had so often deceived him in the past. No, Christine, some lines once crossed allow no return. I want you to pack your things and leave my house by the end of the day. You can't just kick me out like this. This house is as much mine as it is yours. Actually, it's not. Brownstone Estate has belonged to my family for generations. It is registered exclusively in my name, as you well know. Do you remember how you insisted that I not include you in the deed when we married? You said it was old-fashioned, that the present was what mattered, not the assets. Christine's face paled as she recalled her own strategy turning against her. At the time, she planned to convince Richard to sell the property, considering it too old-fashioned and isolated for her sophisticated taste. And what about Helen? She asked, in a last effort. Are you going to separate a 7-year-old girl from her own mother? Helen will stay with me until we resolve the custody issue legally. You can visit her, of course, but you will not take her away from the estate without my authorization. That's kidnapping. I'll call the police. Call them. Explain to them why a 73-year-old woman has bruises on her body, why she was found almost drowning in a basin, why she trembles with fear when you approach. The words hit Christine like a slap. She knew she was cornered. Slowly, the mask of fragility gave way to an expression of pure hatred. You will regret this, Richard Brown, she threatened, her voice low and controlled. No one humiliates me like this and gets away with it. Enough with the threats, Christine. Deborah, Richard called, turning to the maid who remained at a distance. Could you please accompany the madam to her room so she can pack her things? And then call a taxi to take her to Princeton. Yes, sir. I don't need a babysitter, Christine retorted, composing herself. I know the way to the room I shared with you for 8 years. She stomped out without looking back, the rigid posture of someone trying to maintain a last vestige of dignity. Richard sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the last few hours on his shoulders. He turned to Deborah, who was awaiting instructions. Accompany her discreetly, please. Don't leave her alone in the house. I don't trust what she might do in a fit of rage. I understand, sir, and I'm sorry for all this. Don't be. I'm grateful for your courage. Without you, I might never have discovered the truth. 3 hours later, Christine left in a taxi, taking only 2 suitcases with her most valuable personal belongings. She promised to return with lawyers to retrieve the rest, casting a final look filled with resentment at the house she had once considered hers. When Zelda returned with Mrs. Dulcie and Helen, the sun was already beginning to set, painting the highland sky with shades of orange and pink. The girl was sleeping in the back seat, exhausted after a day out. Mrs. Dulcie, however, seemed more alert and alive than in recent months. Richard awaited them on the veranda, a mixture of relief and apprehension on his face. How would he explain to a 7-year-old child that her mother had left? How would he rebuild the broken trust in his family? Where is Christine? Mrs. Dulcie asked, as soon as she entered the house and noticed her daughter-in-law's absence. She's gone, Mother, Richard replied simply. We talked and, well, she won't be living here anymore. Mrs. Dulcie nodded slowly, absorbing the information. There was no joy on her face, only a silent understanding of the gravity of the moment. And Helen, what will we tell her? The truth, as gently as possible, that Mommy and Daddy won't be living together anymore, but that they both love her very much and will always be a part of her life. As Zelda carried Helen, still asleep, to her room, Richard and Mrs. Dulcie sat on the veranda, watching the first stars appear in the night sky. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with a mutual understanding that needed no words. I'm so sorry you went through all this, Mother, Richard finally said, holding his mother's wrinkled hand in his. I should have realized it sooner. Don't blame yourself, my son. Christine is very skilled at hiding her true nature. And I also bear some blame for not speaking up sooner. Now we have a chance to start over. I promise I'll be more present, that I'll take better care of you and Helen. Mrs. Dulcie smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her tired face. I know you will, Richard. You've always been a good son, a good father. And you'll be a good single man too, she added, with a touch of humor she hadn't shown in a long time. In the weeks that followed, Brownstone Estate underwent a gradual transformation, not only in its physical structure. Richard began renovations to make the place more accessible for his mother, including the installation of handrails and an elevator, but primarily in its atmosphere. The house, once tense and suffocating, now breathed a renewed tranquility. Mrs. Dulcie, free from constant fear, began to flourish again. She started giving tutoring lessons to children from the nearby village, rekindling her passion for teaching. Her old sparkle in her eyes returned, as did her appetite and her willingness to walk through the gardens she loved so much. Helen, after the initial shock of her parents' separation, adapted surprisingly well to the new reality. The girl, who had always been closer to her father and grandmother, flourished in the atmosphere of love and respect that now permeated the house. Christine maintained regular contact, taking her daughter to spend weekends at her new apartment in Princeton. but primary custody remained with Richard, by court order. Richard reorganized his business, delegating more responsibilities so he could work mainly from home. When trips were inevitable, they were shorter, and he always returned with presents not only for Helen, but also for his mother. Deborah, who had planned the job at the estate as something temporary, ended up accepting the invitation to stay. Richard, recognizing her talent and education in pedagogy, offered her a new position, Helen's private tutor and Mrs. Dulcie's assistant in her project of tutoring classes for underprivileged children in the region. The salary was significantly better, and she now occupied one of the guest rooms in the main house, no longer in the staff quarters. On a Sunday afternoon, about 3 months after Christine's departure, Brownstone Estate hosted guests for a garden lunch. They were retired teachers, old colleagues of Mrs. Dulcie, whom she hadn't seen in years. Among them was Edward Oliver, the former principal of the school where she had taught for decades. The two, now widowed, discovered an affinity that went beyond shared memories of the past. From the veranda, Richard watched his mother laughing openly, surrounded by friends, while Helen and other children ran across the lawn under Deborah's watchful eye. Zelda, by his side, served fresh lemonade. "I never thought I'd see your mother like this again," the cook commented with tears in her eyes. "It's as if the years had rolled back." Richard nodded, feeling a deep gratitude. "It's as if the estate has finally become a home again, hasn't it?" "Yes, sir. A true home." Later, when the visitors had left and night fell over the highlands, the family gathered in the living room for a card game, now a Sunday tradition. Helen, Mrs. Dulcie, Richard and Deborah laughed and chatted animatedly, creating new bonds and strengthening existing ones. Outside, the full moon bathed the golden trumpet trees at the entrance with its silver light, while crickets and frogs composed the forest's nocturnal symphony. Brownstone Estate, which had witnessed so much silent suffering, now housed a family different from the conventional, united not only by blood ties, but by conscious choices of love, respect and mutual care. And Mrs. Dulcie, watching her son and granddaughter, thought of the long journey since the days of fear and humiliation. She remembered the orchids in her garden, how some needed to go through periods of apparent dormancy to then bloom more beautifully and strongly. Perhaps life was like that too. Periods of darkness that, overcome with courage and help, gave way to unexpected blooms. When Helen, with a cry of joy, announced that she had won the game, everyone applauded. And in that simple applause, in that celebration of a small childlike victory, lay the greatest lesson that family had learned, the importance of never remaining silent in the face of cruelty, of extending a hand to those in need, of recognizing that the true value of a home lies not in its walls or possessions, but in the ability of its inhabitants to protect, respect, and love each other unconditionally. End of story, dear listeners. We hope that the story of Mrs. Dulcie and her family at Brownstone Estate has touched your hearts. This narrative reminds us of the importance of being alert to the signs of elder abuse and the transformative power that the courage of a single person can have. For more inspiring stories like this, we have prepared a special playlist that you can find by clicking on the link to your left. If this story has stirred emotions in you, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Daily, we bring you unique narratives that explore the complexities of life and the bonds that unite us. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion is valuable to us and to our entire community of listeners. Until the next story.